The NFL draft is finally here. Who will the Jets select? We will discuss the possibilities on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Thursday, April 28th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, and I thank you for making the show your first listen or your first watch every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit that subscribe button, and you'll never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps other Jets fans find the channel. Little programming note, I'm planning to go live on YouTube around 7 p.m. Eastern tonight. Should be like a 20 to 30 minute show to preview the Jets and the NFL draft. So if you're interested, again, around 7 p.m. Eastern time, you can go to the Locked On Jets YouTube page. Happy draft day. It's finally here. We have been waiting since January for this moment. Lots of speculation, especially over the last few days, and I think it's safe to say nobody knows what the Jets are going to do tonight because the rumors have been all over the map. And the way I see it, there are kind of like three general directions the Jets could go with their two picks tonight. And on today's show, we're going to talk about those three general directions. And I'm going to begin with what I would call, I guess, the chalk general direction, which is what pretty much everybody's been expecting them to do. Maybe not since the beginning of the offseason, but certainly since the end of free agency, because the Jets entered free agency with numerous pronounced needs. They addressed some of them, they did not address others. So since the end of free agency, it's been pretty clear where the key areas the Jets need to address are, and that's defensive end and wide receiver. And for the most part, the projections have been the Jets are probably going to take a defensive end at 4 and a wide receiver at 10. And that's partially because that's where the talent of this draft matches up. The perceptions, at least, are that the real premium talent, the top 5 talent in the draft, a lot of it comes at the defensive end position. And then at wide receiver, the talent is not quite as good. You have guys who are maybe more late top 10, early teens, which is where the Jets picked 10th overall. And the candidates, you know who they are. You have Trayvon Walker out of Georgia at defensive end, Kayvon Thibodeau out of Oregon, Trayvon and Kayvon. And then you have Jermaine Johnson out of Florida State, who's been getting some late buzz. And then at wide receiver, there are also 3 main candidates. You have Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State, Drake London out of USC, and Jamison Williams out of Alabama. And of course, Williams is coming off a serious knee injury. And if not for that injury, maybe he'd be in the mix at 4. And a lot of people think he would be the top receiver prospect in this class, if not for the injury. So this is pretty much the direction it seems like things have been leaning since the free agency, although the last couple days things have kind of been less clear. There have been all sorts of different rumors about what the Jets are going to do. It's difficult to judge what's going to happen because sometimes what happens is, you have a good sense of what the team's going to do, and then they throw out a lot of fake rumors the last couple days to throw you off the scent, and then it turns out what you were expecting them to do all in the weeks leading up to the draft is exactly what they do. So if that's the situation, you'll have defensive end at 4, you'll have receiver at 10. And then sometimes what happens is a team really does a good job hiding its intentions the week leading up to the draft. And then a few days before the draft, their true intentions leak. And that happened most famously for the Jets in recent memory in 2018. It wasn't the Jets themselves, it was Cleveland. Everybody thought that they were drafting Sam Darnold in 2018 first overall. And then like a few days before the draft, it started coming out that they were taking Baker Mayfield after an offseason where everybody thought they were taking Darnold. So which of these scenarios will play out? It's difficult to say. If it's the first scenario, you'll see the Jets take a defensive end at 4 and a wide receiver at 10. Now, what would this mean? Well, we can never tell exactly how a player is going to pan out. We have our opinions on players, but sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we think a guy's going to be great and he's not that good. And sometimes we think a guy's going to be a bust. Every single person who's ever evaluated a draft prospect has had this. Sometimes you think a guy's going to be a bust. He turns out to be very good. So it's important to approach what happens tonight with some degree of humility. The Jets may not do exactly what you want them to do. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to turn out poorly. Every single one of these prospects has a lot of positive points. They have potential, but it doesn't mean that they're going to reach their potential. So it's something to keep in mind. But let's say hypothetically the Jets draft a defensive end at 4. If this player is as good as advertised, this defensive line is almost good to go for this team now. And Robert Saleh, we know, loves to build his defense around the line. You add a defensive end to go across from Carl Lawson if Lawson can stay healthy. And then you've got Quinnen Williams at tackle. You have John Franklin Myers kind of bouncing between tackle and end. Jacob Martin, Vinny Curry as situational guys. That's pretty good. That's going to be a pretty good defensive line. And they're going to be able to get after the quarterback in passing situations. Maybe you need one more player or two. Maybe you need like a Foley Fatukasi replacement, kind of a run-stuffing defensive tackle, a nose tackle type of guy. Maybe you could use another kind of versatile guy who can slide inside and outside. Maybe another like Franklin Myers, depending on whether it's a rundown or a passing down. You play him outside or inside. But that defensive line, that's close to good to go, I think. I think that's very close to being fully built. So Robert Saleh in 2 years then would have pretty much accomplished his goal and gotten what the Jets need, what he thinks his defense needs to function. So you would be able to see the clear priority there that would continue from last offseason when the Jets began their quest to build this defensive line. It would be pretty close to done at that point. The wide receiver position, I think the rationale for that is obvious on a couple of levels. First of all, Jets are one of a handful of teams in the NFL who don't have a receiver with a 1,000-yard season on his track record. Now, if you draft somebody, that's not going to change because obviously a rookie has never posted 1,000 yards in the NFL. But it gives you another chance. It gives you another opportunity to find somebody special. And essentially, you double your opportunities because you have Elijah Moore coming back who could be very good, who could be that type of go-to guy the Jets need. But right now, your eggs are all kind of in his basket. It's one thing to say you think Elijah Moore's got the potential to be like a 1,000 to 1,200-yard receiver. It's another thing to guarantee it and say we're building everything around this, and if this doesn't happen, it's not going to happen. Those are two very different things. And you look, Braxton Berrios is starting right now. You could argue maybe he's okay as a 3. I mean, I think he's better off as a backup. And beyond that, Jets have no depth at wide receiver right now. And that's not what you want with a second-year quarterback because you saw, even when the Jets actually had relatively decent depth at the receiver position last year, you saw how grim things got near the end of the season with that group. So now you're entering the season with even less depth, pretty much one injury away from having a guy who really doesn't have any business seeing playing time in the NFL take on a starting role. So it's almost a necessity that the Jets are going to need to leave this draft with an early round receiver just for depth reasons. But beyond that, you need a high-end option. You need somebody who conceivably could be a high-end target for Zach Wilson because this is not an area the Jets have really addressed well at all in the offseason. Outside of adding the 2 tight ends who could be useful players on checkdowns and the short passing game, there's nobody who really threatens a defense outside of potentially Elijah Moore in the passing game. So it's almost it may happen. I could see a scenario where the Jets draft somebody maybe like round 2 at the receiver position. I would not take that chance. I would, if I were the Jets, and we'll talk a little bit about another scenario that could involve a trade or two. But if I'm the Jets tonight, I feel like you've got to get the best receiver on your board. Unless you're making that kind of a deal, because we've seen in the past what happens when you don't surround a quarterback with the right pieces. We've seen it very closely. And even right now, this receiver group is probably Zach Wilson has is probably better than any receiver group Sam Darnold had. But that's a very low bar. So the goal is not to be better than what the Jets were 2 years ago. The goal is to give Zach Wilson a real fighting chance here with a high quality group of receivers, or at least a group of receivers that's as high quality as you can possibly make it. Because history shows us, I mean, you look at any good quarterback in the NFL, I mean, you could find maybe an exception or two. Typically, they developed with a top-end pass-catching target. And that's what the Jets need to provide Zach Wilson with. And again, I think Joe Douglas has done a better job than Mike McCagnon did or John Idzik did with Geno Smith. But I don't think he's done a good enough job as of yet. But that's one of the reasons you have all these early picks. So that's one option. And these would be pretty much addressing your core areas of need. Positions that are really premium positions, not just for the Jets, but practically any team. I mean, I guess the reason people gravitate to situations like this is because you turn weaknesses and you could kind of make them into strengths. You could get a player, you could take a spot where your starter's not very good and replace him with a very good player. And that's a pretty rapid way to improve your roster. It has a pretty pronounced effect. So That's what everybody's been expecting up to this point. Or most people, maybe not everybody, but that's what most people have been expecting to this point. And I think you can see the logic to it. I think you can see why. And at least on paper, without knowing what individual teams in front of the Jets are going to do, it's a strategy that generally matches up with the strength of this draft class, or at least the perceived strength of this draft class. But that's not the only strategy the Jets could take. You could see a different type of move tonight for the Jets where perhaps they try and build a position of overwhelming strength. And I'll explain what I mean by that ahead here on this Thursday Draft Day episode of Locked On Jets. Of course, the NFL draft begins tonight. It's a big night, but there's another big day ahead in a few weeks, and that's Mother's Day. And whether your mom prefers a statement piece or everyday subtle elegance, BlueNile.com has fine jewelry options for every mom. Shop high-quality classic diamond earrings, elegant tennis bracelets, or gemstone pendant necklaces. If you're looking for fine jewelry but having trouble choosing, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7 available by phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Mark Mother's Day with something enduring. Classic diamond stud earrings, elegant tennis bracelets, birthstone pendants, and so much more on BlueNile.com. This Mother's Day, give mom something she'll treasure forever with fine jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off $500 purchases. This podcast exclusive is only good through Mother's Day. Use code Locked On, that's code Locked On, one word with no space. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever peace. Go to BlueNile.com today. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen every day. And for the first time ever, Locked On is hosting live coverage of the 2022 NFL Draft from our studios in Dallas, with pick-by-pick analysis from our local team experts and draft gurus. Tune in all 3 days as our draft team guides you through every pick and every trade in real time. It all begins Thursday, April 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, available on Locked On NFL YouTube and on the Odyssey app. And today we are talking about the NFL Draft. I think there are 3 different ways the Jets could go in this draft. We talked about the first way, which is do what people have been expecting them to do, draft defensive end, draft wide receiver. There's another path the Jets could go. And this 4th pick has become very interesting because over the last few days, you've heard all sorts of rumors. And I think there's one thing that's clear. Nobody knows what's going to happen for sure, except for maybe Joe Douglas and the scouting staff and maybe Robert Saleh, because you've heard everything. In fact, one thing that's been really interesting over the last couple of days is out of nowhere, Sauce Gardner out of Cincinnati has been getting a ton of buzz to the Jets. And we're going to find out, some people, either the people who are coming up with this buzz are going to be proven right or they're going to look bad. Because, unless Gardner could go to Houston at 3, I guess. But I'm really surprised by that because through Saleh's run, he's always talked about how he focuses on defensive line. And his history shows us, even going back to San Francisco, it's defensive line first over corner. Of course, sometimes you make exceptions for exceptional players, and sometimes you change your mind based on the way things play out. And you may look at this Jets corner group right now and say, well, they don't really need a corner. You just signed DJ Reed. We got Bryce Hall coming off a good season. I'd be inclined to agree. I've been saying for weeks, I would not go into this draft if I was the Jets thinking we desperately need to get a good corner in here. But I don't know what you have is so good. I mean, this is not like the Revis and Cromartie group of 2010. This is a group that could still use a high end. And by the way, that year the Jets drafted the corner in the first round, although it was a bust in Kyle Wilson. But they're not so good that you would pass up the opportunity if it was there to add a legitimate, top end shut down corner. And if you draft Sauce Gardner at 4, it's going to generate some criticism because corner is clearly not as big of a weakness as some of the other spots, like defensive end. That defensive end spot across from Carl Lawson's kind of a question mark. I know John Franklin Myers, you got him. He's a good player, but John Franklin Myers has said himself that he prefers playing inside of the tackle position. If you take Sauce Gardner, you're going to get criticism. I don't know that it's necessarily a bad move, though, because there's kind of like this relationship between the pass rush and coverage. Yeah, if you have good pass rushers, your coverage matters less because your guys don't have to cover for as long because you get to the quarterback. But the inverse is true as well. If you have somebody who can lock up the other team's best receiver, it makes your pass rush better because your pass rush has more time to get there. It's not like you're drafting, the run-stopping linebacker or box safety in the top 10. you're drafting a guy who's going to help your pass defense. The NFL's a passing league these days. So I can't go crazy with that. I think it would be a very good pick. You'll see me be pretty happy. I know a lot of people will not love it if the Jets draft a corner because they'll say it's not the biggest need. But more than anything, and I've been discussing this a lot lately, biggest need the Jets have are positions of overwhelming strength where they can just impose their will on another team. And I don't know, especially the way the rules are going in this league, it's very difficult because of how frequently defensive penalties are called in the passing game. It's difficult to use your hands as a corner these days without getting a flag. That means that there are very few legitimate shutdown corners in this league. And there's actually an old theory called the Planet Theory that the old Giants general manager George Young was famous for. His theory was that there are only so many big guys, linemen on either side of the ball who are athletic enough to play in the NFL, but big enough to succeed on the line, and that when you have the opportunity to draft one of them, you have to take it. I think there's almost like that theory almost applies to the corner position now. Now, obviously, the corners are not 300-pounders, but the way the league's rules are, how difficult it is to play corner, if you have somebody who can overcome those rules and play the position efficiently, and you have the opportunity to take him, you almost have to take. It's one of those things you almost have to consider taking. I mean, I'm not saying you have to take. I shouldn't say you have to take it, but you almost have to consider it, no matter how good you are at corner. And there's another spot the Jets look pretty solid at on paper. That's the offensive line. Ikkamakwanu is a guy who's been rumored to the Jets as well, and we know how much Joe Douglas loves the offensive line. Jets' offensive line is decent. Jets' offensive line's not dominant. And this doesn't even get into some of the question marks you've got at the tackle position, where you've got a 30-year-old George Fant coming off a career year who could regress and also is unsigned for 2023. And you've got Mekhi Becton, who you would like to think is going to bounce back this year, but we don't really know what's happening. In fact, the way the Jets approach the tackle position in the draft could tell us a lot about how the team views Mekhi Becton. I think, as a fan in the offseason, you want to be optimistic about every player. You want to hope every player is going to bounce back, and you hope the team is satisfied with every player. There are things happening behind the scenes with Becton. They may be good. We may find that the Jets are very excited about Becton. They think he's ready to go. They think he's going to have a big season, bounce back in a big way. But if they draft Kwanu, maybe that's a sign they don't. Beyond that, George Fant's not a dominant player. George Fant's never going to be a dominant player. Mekhi Becton could be a dominant player. But if you draft Kwanu and you replace George Fant, suddenly you've got 5 really strong run blockers on that offensive line. And you're going to be able to impose your will. And you're going to be able to make Zach Wilson's life easier. Now, I think if the Jets draft either of these guys, either Gardner or Kwanu at 4, maybe you can even throw Evan Neal of Alabama, tackle into that mix, that makes 10 more interesting because there are going to be some edge rushers who are available. And I think 10 is probably going to be either edge rusher or receiver. I'd be surprised if it was not. But then you're only going to be able to address one of your 2 core needs. And it becomes very interesting to see what the Jets do there. And that impacts your strategy in the second round because if you draft receiver at 10, pretty good bet 35 is going to be a defensive end. And if you draft defensive end at 10, I would imagine that either 35 or 38, you're taking a receiver, taking a guy on the second or third tier of the receiver position. So it'd be interesting because the Jets would not be addressing both of their obvious needs tonight, but they might be building a position of overwhelming strength. But of course, this is all assuming that the Jets keep all of their picks and they don't try and trade. There's another scenario out there that involves some wheeling and dealing, and I'll explain that as we close out this Thursday episode of Locked On Jets on Draft Day. I got to be honest with you, I don't know what's going to happen in the NFL draft tonight, but maybe you think you do, and you might want to put some money down. There are plenty of prop bets on where players will be drafted. You've got over-unders. You've got bets on who will go first overall, second overall, third overall. And if you want to put money down, you should know that BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. And it's not just the NFL draft. You can find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the beginning of the Major League Baseball season. Because BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday. The first round of the NFL draft happens tonight. The Jets hold the 4th and 10th overall picks. We've been talking about some of the scenarios that could play out with these 2 picks. Of course, there's also a scenario where the Jets don't draft 4 and 10 as their 2 selections tonight. There could be some trades involved. And the most obvious one, plenty of rumors out there about Deebo Samuel. I've spoken extensively about how I think he'd be a perfect fit for the Jets. And to me, it's pretty obvious. You offer 10. No more, no less. 10 to San Francisco, take it or leave it. Deebo will require a contract extension if it's going to happen. And, like what'll happen, and there are all sorts of rumors about this now. I mean, I've heard one rumor that the 49ers want a specific player at 10, so they'd only make the deal if the player that they want is available at 10. I mean, one thing that's clear is that if Deebo Samuel gets traded, there's already been negotiations, and they already have a deal in place. They have a new contract in place. He's passed the physical. This stuff will probably all happen before the draft if a deal is to be done. It could be a situation. Sometimes what happens in the draft is you agree to terms of a deal with a team, and it's contingent on a certain player being there. So if the player San Francisco wants at 10, we make the deal. And if this player San Francisco wants is not at 10, then the deal's off. That could happen. Deebo Samuel would be a game-changing player for this team. He'd be the top target Zach Wilson needs. He'd be the guy you could build this offense around. Takes a lot of pressure off Elijah. Probably makes Elijah more better as well. Corey Davis becomes your 3rd receiver, which, I mean, suddenly, like overnight, you go from having maybe one of the shakiest receiver positions in the league to something to get really excited about. The type of thing where Jets are going to score some points suddenly if you add Deebo Samuel to the mix. But there are some other trade possibilities here. I mean, there are plenty of rumors out there. There have been rumors about the Saints wanting to move up. There haven't been a ton of rumors about the Jets willing to move down from 4, but it's conceivable if you look at the draft value chart, the picks the Saints have at 16 and 19, if you look at the point value that on them, according to the trade value chart, just about equal to the 4th overall pick. So the Jets could trade down, get a couple extra picks. In fact, I think my dream scenario would be something along those lines where the Jets trade 10 for Deebo Samuel and then trade down from 4 to get those 2 Saints picks. Because then you still got 2 top 20 picks and you got Deebo Samuel. So that would be a pretty good scenario in my book. Also scenarios where the Jets trade down from 10. My guess is that it would be for a quarterback. Some teams looking to move up for a quarterback. Perhaps the price could be, and this is just speculation based on recent history, but historically a team moving down in the 10 range, another team moving up for a quarterback, that could result in a future 1st round pick. And then there's also another scenario, which is my not favorite scenario, where the Jets may package 35 and try and move up and get back into the 1st round and have a third 1st round pick this year. The Jets have 2 high 2nd round picks, so maybe they move up from one of those high 2nd round picks to get back into the 1st round and add a 3rd 1st round pick. Not my favorite scenario, but in a year where there's not a ton of elite talent in the draft, you can understand why they might do it. If somebody falls, if they have like 1 or 2 elite players left on their board and you have the opportunity to move up and get them and you get to like 25, 26 and the price is not going to be that high to move up from 35, I could see the Jets potentially doing that. But we'll have to wait and see. Nobody, as I said, nobody, the only thing I can guarantee you is nobody knows what's going to happen. But we're all very excited to find out. And after tonight, at least some of the speculation will end. Of course, we'll have more speculation on what happens Friday night, but that's for tomorrow's show. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, if you enjoy the show, subscribe to it, leave it a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source, and give the show a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Have a great rest of your day. Again, going to plan 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Locked On Jets YouTube page. We'll do a little draft preview show ahead of the 2022 NFL Draft. See you then.